Good morning. Welcome to our workshop today. It's another Saturday in June. Really amazing how fast the year is running out. And we just came out of lockdown and hoping that wherever you are in the world, you're safe and you're coping and you are following all the instructions we've been giving with regard to how you build your immune system. So today we'll be talking again at some level of depth about the immune system. But before I do that, let me just thank all of you as you join us on YouTube. Later on, we'll post this on Facebook. So we'd love for you to like us, love us, send some comments and corrections because I'm human, I'm fallible. My name is Charles Sine, and I'm the CEO of Anti-Fragility Health. And we have been running this series called the Longevity Workshop Series. So all the workshops I've been running so far this year will be and have been under this series. And so I'm going to take you through some updates around the workshop series and what workshops we'll be running going into the future. So we all know at the core of life, for all of us, we need to survive, and therefore the essence of that is around living a long and healthy life. That is really the core simple message. But it's very complex, it's really complicated. How does one live a long and healthy life? You don't do it by just stumbling through. There needs to be a concerted strategy for achieving that specific outcome. So the way we've structured that is that at the core of life is physiological resilience, is to survive and to have reserves. And that is really critical. Why? Because over time, there has been a lot of volatility with regard to our life on earth, whether it's about the availability of food, whether it's the availability of sunlight, whether it's the availability of water. So there's some critical things that are outside our control that create volatility. And the only way you survive in a very volatile environment is to have these two big strategies. One is a physiological resilience. That means when there's hunger or there's lack of water, we have built the resilience to survive. And a human being can be without water for 4 days. Therefore, we need it, that gives us enough time to go replenish. But secondly, we have to build a metabolic reserve. Most Americans are dehydrated, and so that's a very bad issue because if there is no water, you will not last very long if you're already starting dehydrated. So having the reserve, it's like in your fuel tank, you need some reserve. Once the fuel marker comes up and says you're out of fuel, you still have about 100 miles to go before you fill up. That reserve is critical, but you need to always make sure you fill your tank, which gives you, if you're driving to San Francisco, at least you know you're going to be refueling halfway into the journey, but you know that at least you have enough. So when we talk about immune system, which is really the topic of today, we'll be using these concepts of the key drivers of physiological resilience and the metabolic reserve. So for all our clinical imbalance conversation and our interventions are really structured around those two things. How do we survive the immediate present, and how do we survive the long term, right? Like the lockdown. How do we survive today, and how do we survive if the lockdown persists for a year as it did? And we know potentially another lockdown may be coming up in the winter as COVID shows up again in different variants. And therefore, you need to build your physiological resilience now and the metabolic reserve because we don't know what the volatility of the infections coming is going to be. So very important conceptually understand this, and therefore when we come to the practice, there's real clarity as to what is required. So we have broken this response, how to achieve that response into three big, what I call pathways. The first pathway we've been talking about are the levers of control. They're really the lifestyle things that you need to do. And we've discussed that extensively. There are 9 of them, and it ranges from nutrition to exogenous compounds to sleep to exercise to toxicity to the roadmap to maturity, lots of different things, infections. We've talked about all of these things. What are the things that are within your control, within your lifestyle, to ensure that you can build physiological resilience and metabolic reserve? Very, very important. We've gone through all of that, including your underlying genetics. Not all of us came physiologically resilient. Levels of resilience differ, and levels of the ability to build metabolic reserve differ. So you need to find yours and optimize, and we're going to talk about that. So that was levels of control. The second area are the 11 signals, and these are the measures. This is the signals that the body tells you with regard to the lifestyle you're living, whether you're doing well or not. And these are what we call the underlying biochemical measures, right? The markers that we use downstairs to measure things like blood pressure, things like weight, BMI. These are all measures that allow us to say, am I putting on weight? How much fat do I have? How much muscle do I have? Those are very important things as we look at a lifestyle that includes exercise, rest, sleep, and all of those things. So we're going to be walking through those 11 signals. And finally, there is the required mindset. So you could do these things, but it requires a mindset of survival, what I call a mindset of mental toughness and aggressiveness. The only people who win, whose genetic line win, are people who have the mental toughness and the aggressiveness to win. The rest will lose. That's what survival on earth requires for you to live a long and healthy life. There is no other way out of it. You can't just coast your way through it. You will be called a vulnerable and the virus will get you. So it's really critical that we understand that there is a toughness that is really required to survive. So that will be coming later on in the series, but we are now in the second pathway in this series. We finished the levels of control. You can find all those videos in YouTube and on Facebook. Go to Anti-Fragility Health on YouTube and you find all our videos and you find the playlist. Last week we started with this overall broad definition of clinical imbalances. I've added one of them. We're going to walk through them now, and then we're going to go in depth into immunity as a signal. So let's walk through the 11 clinical imbalances, or the 11 areas of measurements, or what I call signals. These are the signals that tell us how well we are doing with regard to health span and lifespan. Very important signals. The first one, cardiometabolic. Most Americans die from cardiometabolic disease. We call it a disease, but these are imbalances that develop and send us signals that tell us something is not right. We have separated this, but we all know that these are all interrelated. So when somebody dies, we say he died from heart disease, but if you did a real deep postmortem, you find out there were lots of other things wrong. So we've separated them because as humans, we can just chew one bite at a time. So cardiometabolic will explore things like your lipid, the overall lipid architecture of HDL, LDL, cholesterol. It looks at inflammation. It looks at sugar management, glucose and protein architectures. So that whole cardiometabolic area, there are measurements and signals that will tell us. And as we know, one of the first early signals of a chronic illness or imbalances are levels of triglycerides, which is the long-chain fatty acids. Second, we're going to talk about immunity, and we're going to go in depth into that today. Then there's stress, the big killer. 4 drivers of stress: perception, right? Appetite, perception, one of the areas, sleep, which we're going to also talk about, inflammation, which we're going to talk about, and sugar, the stress from sugar. And it's interesting how the glycemic dysregulation, which is the stress from sugar, can be really challenging to the body. So when you eat too much sugar, the beta cells in the pancreas, the islets of Langerhans, are forced to produce insulin to take that sugar out of the bloodstream into the muscle or into the liver for conversion into fat. Because for sugar to be in the bloodstream, it causes a lot of problems in the lumen, which is really what causes cholesterol to gather and cause blockage in the arterial walls. So removing sugar out of there, because it's a very big and sharp molecule and it causes damage, it needs to be removed. Because when it wounds the lumen, then the body deposits fat, cholesterol, and that's what really causes blockage. So sugar as a stress factor is very challenging in itself. GI, the architecture, or what I call the conductor of the immune system. Almost 70% of our immune system is in the GI tract. So the GI sends us a lot of imbalances or signals, and one of the big signals is the quality of your urine, the poo, number 2, whether it's a 4 or 3 kind of poo. All of those are really important signals. Whether you have constipation or diarrhea, they're all strong indications of GI health. And so those signals are very important. Toxicity, very challenging area. We can do measurements of your pee, urine, or saliva, and to see heavy metal toxicity or some of the other toxicities around that. Pain, very clear one, musculoskeletal. When people are in pain, there is pain. It's difficult to measure because pain itself is a perception. Some people tolerate it well, some people don't. So we have pain measurement scales that will show what's going on. Then there's circulation, especially microcirculation. We measure that on our Mendler scan and other places where we check blood flow and blood pressure in the critical points across the body to see whether the body is receiving at the microvascular level the nutrients that it's supposed to receive for ultimate function. That's why you see a lot of people, even in their 30s, begin to have tingling and numbness and cramps, which are powerful indications of issues of microcirculation. Energy, fatigue, big problem today with people always tired, loss of energy. We know that's really tied to the source of life, which is the mitochondria, the power cell of life. So if the mitochondria has dysfunction, which is what powers even everything else, it's like the battery. If the battery dies, there's no life. So energy is at the source of life, and so it's a very important signal of dysfunction. Cognition, which is memory and processing, which is critical for us to even be aware or be alive. You see people with Alzheimer's, they are alive, but they're not aware. And so awareness and memory function is really critical signals. Hormones, the one that drives life, right? You know, God created this complex architecture, so many things. Look at the thyroid hormones, the cortisol, the sympathetic hormones and the parasympathetic hormones, DHEA, testosterone, progesterone, and estrogen. All these are really critical signals. When they're out of balance, we begin to see significant dysfunction. And finally, the big one that I added, it used to be 10, I now have added sleep. Because I think that we spend 1/3 of our lives sleeping, and so sleep is a critical signal for us. If we cannot sleep well, we have insomnia, or we have sleep apnea, which are dysfunctions in sleep and breathing in terms of oxygen supply, are big measurements of dysfunction itself. So let me move. I know I'm going through a lot, and for some people as they watch these videos, it's really overwhelming, but you know you can watch it again and again and just make sure that you're getting it. So let's move to talk about immunity. So our immune system is driven by what we call lymphocytes, white blood cells, white cells in the bloodstream, right? And so you can do a white blood cell count. When it's increased, you know there's a problem going on. When it's reduced, you know there's some kind of exposure. So you can do a complete blood cell count and see the white blood cell count, and it will give you an indication of how your body is responding to current or ongoing infections. So our architecture for response, as God built it, is based on two layers. We have the innate, which we're born with, and then we have the adaptive, which develops based on our environment, our genetics, and our lifestyle. So it's really important that we understand the innate, the NK cells and the macrophages are the ones that attack once things penetrate the initial barrier of the skin, the nose, the tongue. Once they penetrate what we call the epithelial barrier, which is the cover of the skin or the GI tract. Once they penetrate that, then we have the NK cells and the macrophages get into action immediately. And I'm going to talk about that in terms of the immune cascade, what is the real process. And the second area, which is the adaptive immune system, is triggered if the innate cannot crush the invasion. So the adaptive system steps up, and that's where we have the B and the T cells, and they have antibodies that come, or immunoglobulins that come and attack. These are like specialized forces. We have ground forces, we have air, water, sea. So we have all kinds of specialized forces that are deployed based on the intelligence that the NK cells and the macrophages have communicated back into the immune control center. So the adaptive is a more background response, and when we look at the immune cascade, we'll see that when there is an attack from day 1 to day 3, whether it's a flu attack or a virus attack or a bacterial attack, we get the NK cells and the macrophages as the first level of attack. If they overcome, then either the fever breaks by day 3 and we know it's over, but if it persists by day 3, day 6, the NK cells are now supported by the B cells and the T cells. And now they're bringing more specialized forces and bigger ammunition to crush. By day 6, by day 10, what's happening is that the T cells now have learned who the enemy is, and they are now differentiating with specialized weapons and architecture and building memory so that for future they can identify, but for now they can still look at what's going on as the viruses themselves are beginning to multiply and differentiate. Because the viruses are not stupid. As they fight in this battle, they are also changing and adapting and differentiating and changing and creating variants, as we can see from what's happening with the COVID-19. This stage is a very important stage because this is how we build adaptive memory for future attacks. And that's why we do vaccinations, so we can build memory, adaptive cell memory for future attacks. So when future attacks come, the body by day 3 will already have T cells and B cells to fight because they already have the memory. The macrophages and the NK cells will say, we got another kind of this virus, deploy the forces, special forces immediately, because we are not trained and don't have the equipment for that fight. So how do we intervene? How do we help our patients? We are trying to build, as I said in the beginning, physiological resilience for the initial attack and metabolic reserve if the attack is sustained. That's really at the core of intervention. And we do that through prevention, reversal, and optimization. You've heard that from me before. Because at the core, let us really look at what is the sustaining challenge. If infections continue, there is what we call chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation is a diversion for the immune cells. So any kind of infection that persists in the body, whether it's flu, whether it's allergies, whether it's urinary tract infections, any infections that persist are distracting the immune system for the big fight. That's why we call them vulnerabilities. So if you already have heart disease, diabetes, or any of the chronic illness, you already have high levels of inflammation. The high levels of inflammation distract the immune system. And when the immune system are distracted for too long, they suffer from immunosenescence. What's immunosenescence? The cells begin to die. And that's what happens when we look at the white blood cell count and it's dropping, because they're dying and they're not being replaced because you are not doing the things that we're going to talk about that helps replenish and fix. And what's the last one? Mitochondrial health. It's like logistics. Soldiers who don't have food cannot fight. So the mitochondrial performance is critical for immune response. You have to make sure that the mitochondrial cells, the mitochondria in the B cells, the T cells, the NK cells, and the macrophages are at top performing. And what do we need to do around that? We need to make sure that oxidative stress that compromises mitochondrial health and mitophagy are optimized by the supplements that we're going to talk about. So as I end this topic, I want to talk to you about what are the prevention supplements. And we all know that at the core of prevention, we are looking at particular products like vitamin C that helps support NK cells and macrophages. We are looking at vitamin D and zinc. These are critical supportive minerals and vitamins that help the immune cells build and sustain themselves so they don't suffer from immunosenescence. They also calm down inflammation. Sorry, I didn't got the fish oil here, but that's a critical component of this prevention. So you are calming, but also you're using quercetin and the other supplements we have here, NAC, to reduce oxidative stress and allow the mitochondria optimal performance. So everything that we offer is part of prevention based on if you're healthy, you have no ongoing infections, you want to make sure you build metabolic reserve because you already have built physiological resilience. How do we know you've built it? If you have no ongoing infections or fights in your body, it means that you're doing the lifestyle things that ensure you're in good health. But you need to, on a prevention basis, build metabolic reserve. If you have ongoing infections or vulnerabilities, like high blood pressure, inflammation, obesity, and things like that, then you are in the reversal stage, which means that you need to continue to build and support the fight that's ongoing, plus building metabolic reserve. And for optimization, we then push IV therapies that provide immediate nutrient relief into the body in terms of poly-MVA, which is a 5 times powerful antioxidant to optimize mitochondrial function and therefore support BT cells, NK cells, macrophage performance. We provide things that will reduce inflammation like fish oil or SPM, which modulate inflammation and reduce the issues of inflammation, and all the other nutrients that would support like NAD that help with cell communication and cell performance, and also impacts the telomeres, which is a critical issue for senescence, and all the other things to support and enable reduce inflammation from diet, exercise, and sleep. Lots of talk today, deep challenge issues. But that's what God gave us. We need to be curious. Then we have knowledge. Then we can take action and build the right habits. At the end of these conversations, that is the critical issue. Do you have the mindset and the curiosity required for action, for knowledge and action, so that you can have what you want, which is a long and healthy life? Thank you for joining us. I appreciate all of those watching. Love us, like us, send your questions and comments, and I'll see you next week as we continue to work in the series of longevity. Thank you for joining us.